So you should see a watercolor picture here, do you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so notice how I did the text. It's done in ink. It's very carefully printed. So, as I say, it was actually brighter. So it was a sketch for something else. I used watercolors, and occasionally you see here, I use pencil and color crayons. So you don't just have to use one thing. You can also use pencil and watercolor at the same time. And as I say, graphite pencil, color crayon, watercolor, you can mix things up. You don't have to be pure. And as I say, black ink. So, just play this. Here are some tools that are very useful. Oop. So, the tools. So I have tubes of watercolors here. I have this here. You see this thing here? That's masking tape. And it's a particular kind of 3M masking tape that's light purple. And I use masking tape a lot on drawings where I want a straight line. So if I want a watercolor with a straight edge, I mask off the part that I don't want to color. So, but masking tape comes in all different kinds. And trust me, I have tried them all. And this light purple 3M one that I bought on Amazon is definitely the best. If you use a blue masking tape, you'll just rip the top of the paper off and it won't be nice at all. So this light purple one is, I find, an invaluable tool. I have watercolors, I have a glass of water, and I have an old plate. So go to the kitchen and get yourself an old plate, very important. I also have some soft brushes, thicker and thinner, and I also have a dip pen, which I use with a little bottle of ink there. Nice waterproof ink that I got from Blick. So all these things are available from Blick, except I found that Amazon was better for the 3M masking tape. I've also got a pencil here.
One question, Professor. Do we have to do it either traditionally or digitally to color it?
I don't like digital color. I much prefer traditional.
Okay, then I'll work on traditional.
This is not kind of a graphic arts class. This is more of a fine arts class. When you do it on the computer, you end up getting very flat color, which is kind of boring, I think. So here I'm going to do the lettering. So I wanted to show you doing the lettering. And I bother, as I say, to use a ruler. A ruler is a super important tool. So I make sure I get the letters don't waver around the page. Some people are doing that really nicely. Some people could, you just go to CVS or Rite Aid or whatever, you can get a cheap plastic ruler. And I'm writing the text carefully by hand in pencil first. And you can scoot through that. So I've got it nicely in pencil. And I can erase everything. This is a nice soft, this art gum eraser. I really like it. And then I use a dip pen because it gives you a really nice line to carefully copy over my pencil. So I never do it in pen first. And you see, I'm not rushing, I'm not hurrying. I'm really thinking of each letter as an object.
Is that ink or it's a type of paint?
What was that?
Is
Is
it
that
ink?
an ink or it's a type of
Mhm.
paint?
This is ink here. This
Mhm.
is ink. Was that your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, a little waterproof ink that I got from Blick. It's called Black Cat or something.
Is it Doc Martens?
No, it's not. It's
Mhm.
I'll show you after. It's called Black Cat Waterproof India Ink, and it comes. You can get it at Blick.
Okay. Black Cat. I'm going to put that in the chat for people to follow.
I mean, there's other brands as well.
I have like half dozen bottles of this at school that I would just give everybody if we were at school.
So you notice, as I say, me carefully going letter by letter. And then when it's dried, I will rub out the pencil with my soft eraser. But you want to make sure it's dried. This process of coloring and inking is not something that can be done fast because you want to let things dry before going on. Otherwise, things smudge and smear and just generally mess up, bleed into each other. Not something that can be done in a hurry. So now what I've done, I want to show you preparing to use my watercolors. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pour out some water into that plate. And then I squeezed out a little bit of blue. And you can see me mixing it with water. And then what you see is that I'm testing it out on a scrap piece of paper. Often before I just start coloring my real drawing to see how dark it is or light or what it really looks like, I always have a scrap piece of paper standing by. I use that scrap piece of paper all the time just to get a feel for what's coming off the brush so I can see what's coming off the brush before I go into my drawing proper. Because once I've made a mark on my drawing with watercolor or ink, I cannot erase it. Does that make sense? So always have a piece of scrap paper standing by to test out what you're doing. So what you see here is I squeezed out a little bit of watercolor and I'm mixing it with some water that I've got here. So I thin it down. It's always better to go from lighter to darker because if I make something too dark, I can't subtract. If I do something in blue too light, I can always put another coat of blue on. Does that make sense? So it's always better to start lighter than darker. And I tend to think, as much as possible, use one color at a time for something like this. So think about what do I want to have in blue, and then start doing the blues. So yeah, I'm testing the strength out. And then I'm shading this man's shirt in blue. And I'm putting it on quite wet there. And then I can always darken it. If I want to add shading or whatever, I can darken it. And it's nice to put the color on like that when the whole thing is still wet, so it kind of bleeds, which can be a nice effect in watercolor. Does anybody have any questions so far? So go color as much as you can. Obviously, go back to colors, but think about what you want in blue. So I keep going in blue. There I'm going for yellow. One thing I would advise, and I didn't really do that, and I kicked myself. If you're going on to another color, I would actually empty your water and get yourself some nice, clean, fresh water to wash your brush. Because you don't want the colors mixing on your brush. So I'll often spend the time to empty that blue water, wash out my brush before starting another color. I really recommend that. It takes longer, but you don't end up with a whole bunch of muddy colors.
Or maybe even have like a separate thing of water for your warms and your cools.
You could, but I just go to the bathroom, dump it out, and refresh.
Start again.
Otherwise, I'd be knocking more glasses of water over than I'd know what to do with.
That's true.
So here, I forgot, I wanted to show you masking tape. So here, what I wanted to do is paint the table in a pale blue, but I wanted the edge of the table to be a hard, sharp line. And I feel like with a hard, sharp line, where you want a hard architectural line, masking tape will mask off the part you don't want to color and will give you that hard line. Because you can't really draw a hard, sharp line with a brush. You may not want a hard, sharp line, but if you do, I find masking tape really helpful. I'm running out of masking tape, as you can see. Lucky I bought 3 rolls at a time. Yeah, I want the edge of that tray to be nice and clean so the colors don't bleed into each other.
Zoe, what number brush are you using?
Ooh, good question. Let me see, it's right here. It's a number 10.
Number 10.
This is a number 10.
Oh,
I was
okay.
basically using 2, one thinner, one thicker. One's a number 4 for the fine work and a number 10 for the other stuff.
And they're like sable, is it a sable brush?
Probably, they're expensive. They're the more expensive brushes.
Okay.
It's Blick Master Synthetic. So it's not a dead
It's a
animal.
synthetic.
It's
Yeah,
a
so
fake sable. So
a little bit.
no animals were harmed
Right.
making my drawing.
I'll find that link and put it online. The other question, the pen that you were using, is that a Crocol?
God, I've had this for 100 years. I have no idea. It's the kind that has removable nibs.
Right. So it's a speedball of some kind. Okay. Yeah.
And
All right.
really, they last forever if you don't press too hard.
Someone have a question?
But you see, I'm getting these nice kind of clean lines there using the masking tape. If you're filling a large area, use, a bigger brush. That way you won't get kind of scratchiness. And just plow on that paint. But you see how having a nice pool of blue really helps me. So I'm not kind of mixing everything up. I've got like a pool of blue to work with. So what else do I show you? Yeah, I'm painting his face blue. I will do layers. I want his face to have kind of a bluish tinge. So I'll kind of undercoat it with blue. Won't be the finished thing. Here I'm doing it like a little blue glare on this kitchenware. here I'm painting over these rolls, kind of accentuating them. And now when I've got, I mean, if it was my finished work, I would do all the watercolor first. And then I would accentuate things with ink. And so now I'm using my ink to outline with a very thin brush. That's where I'm using my number 4 brush. Make sure that everything has dried. Before you start inking, just make sure everything is dry, otherwise the ink will bleed. I mean, I would do it normally color by color, just let it dry. Go away, have a cup of coffee, check out Facebook, and then, you know, by that time everything will be dry. So I'm outlining with my nice thin brush, and that's, I love to use my brush to draw lines because it gives me a really nice line that isn't flat. It varies in thickness, and that's something that you can never get on a computer. When you color in a computer, it's always a kind of dead flatness. Whether it's color or line, it looks like it was done on the computer. It doesn't have the energy and kind of life and variety that doing something by hand does. That's why I would personally never use a computer. I use a computer a lot for all kinds of different things. I mean, I use Photoshop, I use Illustrator, but for actually drawing, I still go the old-fashioned way. I mean, Illustrator can be very useful for different things, for design work and so on. It's not like I'm not knocking the computer. I won't say I haven't fixed a few mistakes in my drawings in Photoshop, because I have. For some graphic novels, you can do a little touching up in Photoshop and nobody will know the difference. I'm not saying it isn't useful, but I'm saying still drawing by hand gives a unique feeling of you. There's something about your hand that can be only done by you. So there you see we're outlining in with my pen, with my brush. So I just use the pen for the text. When I'm drawing with ink, I use my brush. And here I just ended up with a detail of the drawing so you can see it. And you see how on his face, I have layers. So I have blue, I have black, and then I've outlined his features with a brush to make them stand out. And then I just added some accents of color here, the kind of yellow fluorescent light, his lips with colored pencils. So I'm not saying that's the only way to do things. I'm saying it's one way to work. And that's a few tips about how you might approach it. Does anybody have any more questions?
What's the color? What's the paper? It's watercolor paper, Jackie was asking. Right?
It's hot press watercolor paper.
Hot press work.
There's two kinds of watercolor paper, hot press and cold press. Cold press is really lumpy. It's kind of got a rough surface. I personally, because I draw quite fine, prefer something called hot press. You can buy it by the sheet through Blick or something like that. You're not required to do that through this class. You can do, I like it, and I like it nice and thick, and then it doesn't kind of buckle. But you know, I did all of Adventures of a Dreamer on a notebook from like the 1930s, which was just a lined notebook and thin paper, and I did watercolor and ink and all that stuff on that. And it ended up a little bit, what's the word? It buckled a little bit, but it still was really beautiful, you know. So I don't think you have to use expensive paper. There are times that I do. It's kind of up to you. But the good thing about expensive paper is you can put a lot of water on it. it'll kind of just absorb that without getting too wrinkly.